Okay, let's start. So welcome to the penultimate class. So yes, I think it's going to be quite easy going for the last two classes. No big new concept, I think. So we left up here. Yeah, covering different contrasting views about the source of the modern trade. So generally, people think that modern trade is caused by differences in resources, differences in technology, differences in wages. If you consider simply that employees are some source of human resource, but also that countries can strategically invest a lot in some sector to gain an advantage and then trade. So that's increasing returns to scale. And also that it's possible to have a source of trade that comes from monopolistic competition. That was a theory that was developed by Kuhlman. He got the Nobel Prize in 2004, if I'm mistaken, for that. Yeah, that revolutionized the view that we had about trade and explained why two countries that are very similar would nevertheless trade in the same sector. So this is the source of what we call intra. Meaning we trade with each other in the exact same sort of like cars, for instance, or yeah, okay. Trade patterns. So the law of one price. See how important it is because it's a law. So what we're essentially saying is within countries, we generally assume that they have one price. So especially if you have perfect competition and no price discrimination, then essentially all the sellers have to sell at the same price. So if you have international trade, then the price should be the same at the world level, with the caveat that at the world level you also have trade barriers, or especially trade costs that comes from the fact that you have to ship things overseas. So aside from the differences caused by transport costs, then essentially you should have one price at the global level, because otherwise what would we do, say, in Canada? So if we have the Americans that sell the trinket at $2 and the Chinese that sell at $1, then there's just no reason to get it from the Americans if we can get it cheaper from the Chinese. So the Americans are going to have to adjust their price if they want to sell anything. Otherwise, we're free to buy from whoever we like. So yeah, this is the same thing as within markets, but can be affected by different things, by custom unions, by trade wars with China, if Trump doesn't like China, so all of these things. But usually, so you would have the same price everywhere. So that's the law of one price. Now, more interesting, what does it look like from a locals market perspective to have a trade? So here we have exports, but we usually don't look at that too much. We look at the opposite, which is imports. So I think I'm going to start with imports, and then we can go back to exports. Yeah, that makes more sense. So imagine this is, I don't know, garment industry. That's how you write. I should be careful about the words I use, because then I start typing it and I think, yeah, you tell me if it's wrong. Yeah, so what happens there is, imagine this is Canada's garment industry. So this is the supply in Canada, the demand in Canada, the equilibrium price in Canada, the quantity demanded or supplied in Canada, and the price in Canada. So this is with no trade whatsoever. So it's perfect competition, and yeah, the price is relatively high. Why? Because we have high cost of labor in Canada. People who so choose to work in the garment industry and use sewing machines every day. They could be doing other things that could give them a lot of money too. So if you want them to make your clothes, then they must be well paid. This is why we have a high price. But then we open trade, let's say from Bangladesh or Haiti. Yeah, different countries where we import our clothes from. And what happens is they're ready to sell us the same thing, so say t-shirt, at a much lower price than we would sell them in Canada. So what's going to happen? Well, us as you have to imagine these are exactly the same, right? We don't distinguish between things that come from one. I know that you can look at the back of the t-shirt and know if it's made in Bangladesh or China or Canada. And yeah, usually you may, this winter I went to buy boots and there were this Canadian brand Paja boots that were like 3 times the price. And I was like, oh, well, they must be very good. And they're made in Canada, but you have to be willing to pay a lot of money to get them. But so now we just abstract from all of this. It's the same good. And then, so for consumers, we don't care about helping Canada whatsoever. All we care about is paying the lowest price possible. So in that case, well, what are we going to do? Well, we have the price, choice between paying a high price and buying local, or paying a low price for imported goods. Well, we pay the low price for imported goods. And so what is going to happen for the quantity of things we buy in Canada? It's going to increase. Why? Because we before bought local at quantity, and now we essentially can buy whatever we like at price PW. Yeah, so one thing that international supply is perfect elastic. So they can send us as many t-shirt as we like, as long as right? Yeah, they call it the world supply. All right, so this is something that otherwise then you would have something like world supply that would be vertical, that would be a bit upward sloping. That's but yeah, why do we say that? So, why? Somebody has an idea. So we sort of have an idea, but concretely, why is the international supply perfectly horizontal, perfectly flat, perfectly elastic? Exactly. It's exactly the same reason as Why in perfect competition, the demand for an individual firm seems perfectly elastic. That's because that small firm is just tiny compared to the whole market, where while here, because Canada is tiny, the world, Canada's the world. So, so imagine China, they can supply to so many countries that so if all of Canada decides to buy Chinese or not, it doesn't matter. They just sell the same, but it has no impact. All right. So who's going to gain and who's going to lose from this opening to trade? Yeah. Both win. So both you're talking about whom there. So you're saying the foreign producers win. Yeah. So almost perfect, except that whenever your supply is perfectly elastic, it means you're essentially indifferent between supplying a big amount or supplying no amount whatsoever. So what I mean by this is, so let me just draw supply. And then there's some price right there. So if your supply looks like this, then this is your producer surplus, right? But if your supply looks like this, what's your producer surplus? You don't have any. So I know that, yes, some Chinese producers who are in charge of supplying Canada are going to win. But yeah, on this graph, you just cannot see it. So we essentially, so they're indifferent. It's a drop in the bucket for them. They can't really see it at the end of the month, how different what difference it makes to, so that Canadians buy or do not buy Chinese things. So really, I know that the other side exists. It's just the scale is so different that we cannot really compare it. But at the Canadian scale, yes. So what we observe is Canadian consumers win and Canadians suppliers produce. So the producers, do they still sell something or not at all? Yes, they sell Q1. Why do we know they sell Q1? Well, because for a quantity lower than Q1, so say at this quantity, then look at the world price, it would still be PWE. And since the quantity is so small, it turns out that the marginal cost for a Canadian firm would be even lower than PWE. So they would be able to provide some quantity. It's just that, yeah, their marginal cost is going up. So at some point, they become too costly. It becomes too costly for them to produce. And can we see a bit more what is the change in the surplus? Yes, we can. So before, I'm just going to start by drawing. So this is what we had before. Like green. And the colors are on my computer. How does that turn out? or less similar. So this used to be the consumer surplus, free trade, and this used to be the producer surplus, free trade. All right. So I'm going to modify them in a few seconds, but just so you see what's going on. After trade, what happens? Well, now consumers can buy a much larger quantity at a lower price. Consumer surplus is always the same. It's the area below the demand curve and above the price. So here you see that they gain a huge chunk of consumer surplus. So we are much better off thanks to opening to trade. And Canadian producers, well, we just said that they supply Q1, and their surplus is always the same. It's the area below the producer surplus and above the above the supply curve and below the price. So in the end, after trade, this is the situation. So they have a very tiny surplus. They're hurting, but Canadian consumers, they are very happy. So they have all this. And let me draw. So, consumer surplus after trade. Okay, so now so they win what? So area A, B, C. Well, they win everything. And Canadian producers, they lose area A. So they lose this area there that was part of their surplus before. And the Canadian consumers, well, they had this zone before, now they have this big zone, so they gain A plus B plus C. So the net gain is what? Well, it's too easy, so it's B plus C. And so economists in general have a positive view of trade. We tend to say that trade increases the size of the pie for most people. And so so sometimes you may hear politicians like say Trump say, oh, we have to protect America against the unfair trade practices of China. So the key word in this sentence is protect America, or if you say protect Canada against the unfair imports from Bangladesh or Haiti. So what is Canada or what is America? That's the big question. In this case, yes, exactly. And the garment industry, you can bet a lot of money that they pay them a lot of money to say that. Why? Because the garment industry, they lose a lot. So yeah, for them, it's devastating to have to lose all this market share and they have to sell it so cheaply, and probably they're going to go. Many of them are going to go out of business. But for consumers, yeah, it's nice to have a slightly cheaper T-shirt, but it's not like you wake up in the morning and you feel so glad that now we have cheaper goods from China. It's at the end of the month, it really shows in the budget. It's especially good for poor people. For poor people, if you have the choice between buying a Pajard Canadian pair of boots at $400 or a cheap China-made pair of boots at $100, that's a breath of fresh air, really. So when we think about the impact of trade, so for people who have money, it's yeah, they're probably going to say, oh, I'm encouraging local business and I have money, so let's pay a lot of money. For poor people, though, Walmart was really, really something extremely good, or Amazon, since so it helps again trade a lot. Yeah, so that's the lesson from this is usually we say that, yeah, all in all, we gain more from trade than we lose, because you can see that this is just this is just a transfer from producers to consumers, but this B and C is pure gain. That said, it would be possible normally to compensate producers. So I'm thinking here exactly producers that really hurt and that are going to have to close down, and all their workers will lose their job. So that's I'm by no means minimizing their hardship. And it would be possible. So in many trade treaties, you have different clauses that say that if you, for some reason, your local industry after opening to trade is in a very bad shape, then you can have temporarily protection to help them, but that's temporary. And in practice, it's really not that easy to implement. Because I lost my job. Who's to say that? Yeah, I would have had like 5 other clients, but they went to buy something else that came from some other country. It's not that easy to make the case. But yeah, so this is what economists have realized is yeah, maybe I should move on because it's going to be explained a bit more. But yeah, just in a few words. These losses of producers are not spread out equally all around. Industry tends to agglomerate a lot in certain regions. So in the States, they have realized that, say, some city everybody was producing furniture, for instance. And so the whole city was made around furniture, and everybody was having a good life, and they thought they would retire in 10 years and it would be good. But then IKEA imports their furniture in the US, and all of a sudden, half of the city becomes unemployed. And then all of the people who worked in, say, fast food restaurants that feed these workers during lunchtime and all the rest, all the supporting industry goes bankrupt as well. So it essentially becomes a ghost town. And so these things happen, say, in places like Michigan, or in the states that Trump won in his election against Clinton, were states that were really hurt by global trade. And you can look at these states, and the number of people who have dependence on opioids and who commit suicide is impossible to compare to the rest of the country. So you cannot minimize the hardship that trade does. Thing is, though, in the long run, once this pain has passed, then we are happy to have cheap goods from somewhere else. And so would the alternative have been to for Canada to remain like in the 50s, say when we imported when we produced everything locally, well, we would be paying everything very expensive. We would be paying our T-shirts a big amount of money, or furniture. You wouldn't have IKEA if you didn't import. So it's yeah, the adjustment is difficult, but it's temporary, and the gains usually, if you can keep on the trade going, is permanent. Yeah, one last thing I want to say about trade is also trade is not the only culprit for deindustrialization in the US and Canada. So a big part of it is technological change as well. As we've seen, you may remember the statistics that I've showed you about steel producing. So the number of workers that you need to produce 1 ton of steel has been divided by 5, more or less. And so these steel workers might have lost 1 or 2 jobs because of imports, but they may have lost a lot more jobs because of technological change. So yeah, adjustment is hard. That's my main point. And here we don't see adjustment. We just see something that happens instantly and everybody's better off, or almost everybody. But in real life, adjustment is difficult. All right. So this is I'm just going back to exports. So what happens if there's export is, well, I'm just going to copy what I just wrote there. Yeah. Here the price is above local price. Opening to trade. So producers sell PW and Q2. And here consumers buying at PW. But really, this is, you shouldn't, I mean, that's the reverse of the other, but why shouldn't you worry too much about this situation there? Because here you have some really steep supply curve. So it's really hard to imagine that a country that has such a high marginal cost would start exporting stuff around the world. Usually when you export stuff, it's because you have a very low marginal cost. You can produce in a very big quantity, like say for instance IKEA. And so this curve there doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. I know that, yeah. So in this sense, it would be like a country that was super efficient locally, and then the world price is high. So I don't know what this would be. Yeah, maybe. All right, I know. Okay, I have one good example. So a good local example that's good for this time of year. Somebody has something in mind? Yes, good example. Yeah, okay, so sorry, this is a very good example. Maple syrup. So if you no trade, but with trade, the world has an infinite, or has a very large demand and is ready to pay a lot of money. So all consumers now compete against French and the US and the other consumers. So they must pay more. So we pay more because we're able to export our maple syrup. That's not all that good for us. We would be paying just PD instead of PW. But for maple syrup producers, it's a very good thing. One thing that though that you shouldn't, so here it really looks like we're in perfect competition, but yeah, it's not exactly the case. So I'm pretty sure the world supply demand would be so this would be PW would be demand in that case, and yeah, there's big market power for Quebec. So, yeah, this is the simplest situation. Okay, so that was it, and now for some reason we go back to comparative advantage. So is comparative advantage obsolete? So so now we go back to the idea that we trade because we have better technology than somebody else, and that other person has better technology in some other sectors. Yeah, so this theory that comparative advantage is a major influence on world trade flow is not obsolete. The theory that a comparative advantage is completely determined by forces beyond the reach of decisions made by private firms and by public policy has been discredited. So yeah, essentially what this means is the line is sort of blurred between. So you would say, oh well, say in warm climate we can produce tea and that's awesome, but nowadays, yeah, countries can pretty much orient their trade policy and their industry according to decision that they make themselves. Yeah, so it's not like predetermined like it used to be. Importance of modern supply chains. Can you conceptually? Don't remember what that is. So economies of scale and globalization as if the complex global supply chains, then these supply chains affect the way we think about comparative advantage and international trade. It also especially affect, so it makes trade wars very complicated. Because so the big aspect of this is again, you can think of Trump wanting to ban imports from China. Well, it turns out that a big amount of what comes from China has been the parts that went into these goods have been produced in the US or Europe, and so it led to, oh yeah, I had a nice anyways, I had a nice caricature of Trump and Xi Jinping with waging trade war, but they were both shooting in themselves in their own foot because they block imports or exports, but that hurts them even more than that hurts the US the partnerships. Good. In country from in country C. So who do you hurt when you block imports from country A? Well, you hurt A, but you hurt also B, and you hurt also C, and it might B or C may be yourself. So it's really not that clear. things are especially messy. Though, as we've been saying previously, with COVID, with the wars, with the trade war, it's become yeah. There has been some reflection that went towards being more self-reliant. Or if you think about COVID and masks, so if all of the masks in the world are produced in China, and then we really need them, we're in big trouble. So it might be good still to have some redundancy at home, even if we end up paying a bit more. Being self-reliant has its advantage. Um, Terms of trade. Terms of trade is the ratio of the average price of a country's export. So it's really receipts and index. So it's based on approximately what do you export, what is the price, what do you import, what is the price. Yeah, weighted average if you want. Of a country's export to the average price of its import. So it goes up when the demand for what I export in the world goes up, and it goes down when the demand for what I export goes down. It goes up when I want to import more of, and so the price I'm willing to pay is higher, and it goes on below. Yeah, so it's this thing there. So the rise in price of imported goods with the price of exports unchanged indicates a fall in the terms of trade, and the rise in the price of exported goods with imports unchanged indicates a rise in the terms of trade. So this is it good or is it bad? Fall in terms of trade? Yeah, this is bad. And this is too small. And this is so why? Because it's exactly like if you think about being a store yourself. So if the price of what you sell goes down, then it's bad because you have less income. And if the price of what you buy goes up, then it's bad because you can buy less of it. So it's exactly the same thing at the world stage. So just as out of curiosity, what influences the terms of trade in Canada the most? Yeah, but so they're quite big. It's true, but so I was thinking about the price of what commodity influences the terms of trade in Canada. What? Yes, exactly. Oil. So I think it's a bit later, but we're going to see it. Oh yeah, so this is going back to our previous graph. I think I alluded to that before anyways. So here we concentrate our production on wheat because we think that the international prices are good for us. If we concentrate our production on wheat, we can consume at A rather than say this thing that would be autarky. But then this represents an appreciation of the terms of trade. And you can see that it's an appreciation because so it makes us better off. Here we can consume more of both goods. Yeah, and again, you can see, so what is the relative price of wheat? it's how much cloth you need to sacrifice to get some wheat. So here you can get quite a big chunk of wheat with little cloth, so that's local price. And here, to get a small quantity of wheat, you need to sacrifice a big quantity of cloth. So that's when the terms of trade are very, very good. So if whenever you're confused, if at the exam you forgot what is the relative price of what, just look at the letters. So B is better than A because B is has more quantity of both cloth and wheat. So if B is better than A, so you can bet that the terms of trade have become better, have improved. Right. Questions about this? So when I have questions about how should I prepare for the final, this is a nifty, nice little question that type of thing that may come up. Just they can show you this and say, if you export wheat and the price of wheat goes up, what happens to the term of trade? Or they may show you this graph, and then so as the term of trade improved or deteriorated. So understanding this sort of thing is good. Not saying that's in the exam, although I've seen what's in the exam, but conveniently I forgot. I cannot help you. But yeah, I've looked at it and it's all right. But this is what I'm saying. So this is like a key concept. Because what's in the text, it's at some point we can try to ask questions, but it's hard to formulate interesting questions. But mechanisms like this, they work out pretty well. Oh yeah, so this is what I was saying by index. So in terms of trade, international trade involves many countries and many products. We cannot use a simple ratio of two prices like this, so we use an index. So in terms of trade is the index of export prices. So it's the price of everything multiplied by its weight in the total exports, divided by the price of everything times their weight in the total imports, and multiply by 100 if you want percentages. Yeah, so a rise in the index is referred to as favorable change in a country's terms of trade. A decrease is unfavorable, and the terms of trade are quite variable, reflecting frequent changes in the relative price of different products. Yeah, and I said that that oil influences the terms of trade of Canada, so I'm going to prove it to you. I've just added this last night, this small graph there. So these are the terms of trade in Canada. You see that it's been going up quite steadily, or not quite steadily, but yeah, going up over time. So it used to be quite bad in the 70s, and then it became. So what happened there? Yes, oil, and then here again, huge spike in the price of oil. Then I'm going to prove it to you. See how the two match. That's just uncanny. No, it's impossible. That's like the same graph. Really?
It's because you're.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I would like this would be a miracle. Okay, I'll try to make this. Yeah, okay. So 2020 is there. I'm just going to try to fit 2000 and 2000. Okay. Yeah, so still we can see quite well. Yeah, so see this huge going up there, and then the spike, and then the drop. So yeah, you can pretty much follow what's, and then here the drop again, which is this drop there. Oh no, yes, exactly. So the two are very much correlated. Why? Because Canada exports oil, so a lot. So when the price of oil it goes up, then the terms of trade of Canada improve, and when the price of oil goes down, then the terms of trade of Canada are worse. Note the following though: is it Canada? Well, it's especially Alberta. Alberta is very happy when the price of oil goes up. Because it makes also it increases the demand for Canadian dollars, so it's also pressure for Canadian currency. But what about Quebec? Well, Quebec, we're not all that thrilled, but it depends. So consumers may be a bit better off, but the producers that would like to export stuff that's not oil, well, it doesn't make our lives all that much easier on the world trade. So it's again, you have to think. This looks like a country is just some ball of stuff, and everybody is like a big family and like each other, and everybody consumes the same. But yeah, it's you can always go more precisely and see that so the terms of trade are especially good because we export a lot of oil. So, but that doesn't necessarily mean that all Canadians are better off. So half an hour left, so we're going to start the next chapter, unless there's a question. All right, so the last chapter. So the last chapter is about trade policy. And yes, so we should spend some time in this class and then finish with this. So I don't know exactly what I'm going to do if I have still have time next time. Maybe I'll do some exercise. So if some of you have a hard time with some exercise, please tell me. I'm going to do it. I take special requests. Yeah, so trade policy is going to be linked to what we've been saying so far. Okay, so why would some country want to rationally protect some industries? Can be. So you could be better off with protection, even though we said that usually trade is good. So in some instances, it might not be good. Common invalid arguments of in favor of protection. So I've been saying that for a while. Explain the effect of tariffs and quotas on the domestic economy. Understand so yeah, I've mostly done that already. So explain why trade remedy laws are sometimes just need this guy's protection. Well, this is especially because we have many treaties that open Canada to trade. But sometimes we can still want to limit the trade with our partners, so we can do it in other ways. Trade creation, trade. Anyways, see that after. Okay, so free trade or protection, as we've seen. So trade can be a contentious debate. Makes some people better off, some people worse off. So most governments accept the proposition that relatively free flow of international trade is desirable. So most, not Trump. Should a country permit the completely free flow of international trade, or should it use policies to restrict the flow of trade, protect its local producers from foreign competition? That's the big question. So more often than not, no. But in some instances, yeah, in some special cases, you can make the argument that yes, not that easy. So it's you can have some economic model that say that yes, you can benefit from production, but does that model really reflect how the world works? Might be, might not. Yeah. So if some production is desired, should it be achieved by tariffs or non-tariff barriers? Yes, tariffs. Tariffs are the best. I'm giving you the plot of the movie. A tariff is a tax applied on imports of goods or services. Non-tariff barriers are restrictions other than tariffs designed to reduce imports. So anything like a quota, so you say you cannot import more than a certain quantity from import quotas, custom procedures that are deliberately cumbersome. So it depends on which product it is. Some products super complicated to import, and some others, then it's very, very easy. And yeah, sometimes it's just if you don't want some product, but you cannot impose a tariff because you have signed a treaty that says you cannot impose it. So that's a good way to go around it, is you make life miserable for people who want to import stuff. And sometimes too. Have to be and false. So anything that has to do with bribing officials at the boundary or dealing with the mafia, because otherwise, so in Russia, for instance, good luck if you. So yeah, now it's a whole other story, but still in the early 2000s, sometimes it's just try to do trade there, but if you don't pay the mafia, they just steal your truck and that's it. You can't do anything. So that's all sorts of other barriers that you have to deal with if you really want to make business. So it can be complicated. Yeah, so case for free trade, we've talked about this previously. So free trade encourages all countries to specialize in producing products in which they have a comparative advantage. So make fix the figure. Yeah, it maximizes average world living standards. So free trade makes the country as a whole better off, even though it may not make every individual in the country better off. So as we said, if your job has been lost because of trade, or if your whole town has a big unemployment because there's a Walmart that arrived, so you know the song La rue principale, les colocs? No? La rue principale? No? Oh, I'm so sad. Yeah, that's a great, great, great song. So, yeah. And it's about the small towns main road with small shops everywhere. But now there's a big shopping center that moved near the town, so now everybody's going to that shopping mall, and nobody's buying these small shops before. So that's I have never given you a homework, but homework. It's in French though, so it's. Great song. Um, oh yeah, exactly. So it makes many people better off, but some people worse. And the modern version of this is, of course, Amazon. So you don't even go to the store anymore. So yeah, what they're describing there is something that happened early 2000 when malls just became ghosts, basically. So some malls still exist, but yeah, they're shells of their former selves. But now even yeah, so I mean, they were describing small shops losing to malls, but now even malls are losing to what? To Amazon and just not going out of your own house and just buying everything online. So even malls are into her. So country engages in trade protection when it implements government policy that interferes in free trade to protect domestic firms and workers from foreign competitions at the deterrent of consumers, of course. There are several valid arguments for protection, uh, promoting diversification. So if a very small country specializing in the production of only a few products um, for very small countries might involve risk that the country does not want to take, technology may render the basic product obsolete. Swings in world prices lead to large swings in national income. So, yeah, I'm going to talk about it here. Also, risk in a single example. Venezuela. Did I talk about this Venezuela? I forget. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I shouldn't start writing. It's just we know the words, but then when you have to write it, is not too sure. So the problem is, so there. And now it from dire straits. So, and I'm not saying that you should never like have a oil industry. So you can think of another country which has had a very good oil industry, Norway. But the thing is, they just took the money and put it aside in some fund. And now, if you go and immigrate to Norway, you receive just by being a Norwegian citizen, you inherit something like $100,000 or even more than that. That's just the size of their rainy day fund that they just leave for future generations. But it's there, so in a way, just being a Norwegian citizen, you have that much money. That's just and compare that to Alberta, they made a whole lot of money with tar sands, and they said, oh, let's lower taxes so we can buy pickups. So it's good. It's fun to buy a pickup, but I mean, so they really they have no debt anymore. But doesn't matter. You can just put money aside for rainy days, and now the future generations in Norway have they can their lives are very very safe because of that. And yeah, in Venezuela too, so they had a lot of government programs to help the poor. So it was all well intentioned, but then when you rely too much on one thing, and that thing doesn't go well, bad situation. Protecting specific groups, so social and distributional concern may lead to the rational adoption of protectionist policies. But the cost of such protection is a reduction in the country's average living standard. So if you want to help the workers there, then yes, but it's going to, yeah. So here the tacit goal is workers. I'm a really cynical guy, sorry. But that's what comes up a lot. So yeah, I've saved your job, so now vote for me. It works all the time. So improving the terms of trade. So large countries can sometimes improve their terms of trade and increase their national income by levying tariffs on some imported goods. Small countries cannot. So this is a real reason. Why? Well, because if you're a very, very large country, what you exert is a big pressure on the world demand. And so if you restrict the demand, so you're essentially something like a monopoly. Yeah, maybe the reverse is easier to understand. So think about Quebec, for instance. So we export maple syrup. So we could think, oh, well, let's make a whole lot of money by doubling our production of maple syrup. Well, not that fast. Turns out that since we are such a big part of the world supply of maple syrup, then it's not all that clear whether we're going to win or lose by exporting more maple syrup, because we're something of a monopoly in maple syrup. So what do monopoly do? They restrict supply so that they can hike prices. So you have to think strategically. So if you're a small country that exports a big, a commodity, and you're a big exporter of that commodity at the world stage, you should think twice before growing a lot in that sector. And this is the opposite of this. So if you're a big buyer of this commodity, then maybe if you buy less of it, you're actually going to decrease the world price of it, and you're going to be better off. That's a bit complicated. So that's why we have to be careful with this sort of argument. But yeah, you can make have a small economic model that shows that this may be the case. So it has to be. Line. So again, there's no chance for a small country to do that. It's just a very big country, but in principle, you could be doing this. Protecting infant industries. I'm not that sure if Chinese is a good example because they export a lot. So yeah, okay, oh, yeah, I see that. Okay, all right. So I'm going to show How much time do I have? 10 minutes. All right. I'm going to finish with this. So what's an infant industry? So exactly. Yeah, so Chinese example is we adopt a lot of Chinese kids. Don't quote me on that, so please. It's the semester is ending, so embarrass myself too much. PW, so world price. And then you have the local demand. So yeah, imagine it's the local demand. It could be the global demand too, but let's go with the local demand. I'm not going to see whether it's local or global. And then the tricky part is that normally when we draw supply curves, we draw marginal cost. Here we're not going to draw marginal cost, we're going to draw average costs. So average cost, you may remember, it starts very high and it goes down because you have fixed cost to pay. So here it's at the country level, so of course you don't have big fixed cost, everything is variable cost, but still you can have something that goes down. So this is the so this is what happens at the and then imagine that your local industry is this way. So this average cost. This is the average cost. So what happens if you don't produce that whatsoever? So imagine that's this is the since they are talking about China. So what has China started to produce and was not producing at all? So computers, for instance. So in the 1990s, China was not producing computers, so they were here. So imagine that some small Chinese firm would have thought, oh, let's start producing computers. Well, they have a very high average cost, so it's not worth it for them whatsoever to start producing. But what happens to average cost and volume is that at some point, the average cost goes down and goes down and goes down. And you see that if, so this is, so before, here. And then The thing is, if you're China, you think, yeah, but we can be very good and we can even produce at lower price than the world price. It's just that we need a head start. We need some big enough volume to learn by doing, to become good at what we do, to learn the trade, and just look, we're going to even beat the other computer industries. And so this is what we can achieve. And so Q here can be something that's like production per year, but you can also think it's accumulated production. So if you started, say, in the early 2000, but you're there and you don't know really what you're doing, but then you keep going and keep going and keep going, losing money, losing money, losing money. But at some point, you become good enough and maybe you have accumulated knowledge, or more or less in a legal fashion, you have taken the knowledge of other people. So that's what Trump was really mad at a lot. And then you become, you're able to beat them. And then, of course, this situation is much better. So in that case, it would actually be better to block imports. So so in that case, if you block imports, then it means that there is no import. Then everything has to be supplied locally, so you're getting there. And then you can allow imports back. Doesn't matter. Chinese computers are going to be cheaper than global computers. All right. So this is essentially the infant industry argument. It is valid. So if I just draw these curves there, it makes sense. The question is it something that's going on in real life? Well, the problem with that is that you have to rely on your local market. You see, it's local demand there. But the thing is, if you're a country that's not super rich, then what's the local demand for computers? It's not that big. So that's why I'm not too convinced with this China example, because essentially what has China done is not to restrict imports of, say, goods produced in the West, to use their local market to develop their industry. What they have done is said to the West, please come and assemble your products here, and you can then ship them back to the global market. So they are not facing local demand, they're facing the global demand. Now they're becoming wealthy enough that yes, it's the global demand, but the local demand as well is substantial, but back then it was not the case. So yes, these are all the problems with this argument. So another example, better one maybe, so I think is Argentina car industry. So they were essentially saying the same thing. Oh, if we can just protect our local car industry, we're going to become so good and so efficient and so fantastic that then we can take over the world. Well, they did that for a while, and what they ended up with is expensive local cars that were not that good. So this is a nifty argument there, but so who knows what the real shape of these average costs are. Yeah, so mostly out of time. So yeah, let's continue here next time. All right, so please come for the last